I, 42F, have been married to my husband Richard, 48M, for about 2 years now. We met at a charity event for a local animal shelter where we both volunteered. Richard was immediately charming and we hit it off, bonding over our love for animals and our shared experiences of losing a parent at a young age. I lost my dad to cancer when I was 15, and Richard's wife passed away shortly after giving birth to their son, Patrick, 24M. Richard raised Patrick as a single father with significant help from his mother, Delilah, 70F. From what Richard has told me, the first few years were incredibly challenging. He was grieving the loss of his wife while trying to care for a newborn. Delilah stepped in to help, which Richard was grateful for at the time. However, as Patrick grew older, it became clear that Delilah's involvement wasn't always positive. Delilah spoiled Patrick rotten. She constantly undermined Richard's parenting decisions and gave Patrick whatever he wanted. If Richard tried to discipline Patrick or set boundaries, Delilah would swoop in and overrule him. She'd buy Patrick expensive gifts, let him stay up late watching TV, and feed him junk food despite Richard's protests. As a result, Patrick grew up to be entitled and selfish. When Richard and I started dating 4 years ago, Patrick made it clear he didn't approve. He was 20 at the time and still living at home while attending college nearby. From the moment Richard introduced us, Patrick was cold and dismissive towards me. He'd make snide comments about my age, I'm 6 years younger than Richard, and imply that I was only interested in his dad for his money. The irony is that I've had a successful career as a graphic designer for over 15 years. I started my own freelance business right out of college and have built up a solid client base over the years. I make good money and have always been financially independent. Richard's income as a high school history teacher is actually less than mine. But Patrick couldn't fathom that I might genuinely care for his dad. Delilah also didn't like me from the start. She'd make backhanded compliments about my appearance or my work. Once, at a family dinner, she implied that my job wasn't a real career and asked when I was planning to settle down and have kids. I was hurt but tried to brush it off for Richard's sake. I really did try my best to get along with Patrick and Delilah. I'd ask Patrick about his studies and try to engage him in conversation. I offered to help him with some graphic design projects for school. I even tried bonding with Delilah over cooking, since we both enjoyed it. But nothing seemed to work. Patrick remained rude and disrespectful, while Delilah continued to make snide remarks behind my back. Things came to a head when Richard and I got engaged after 2 years of dating. We were so happy and excited to start our life together. But when we shared the news with Patrick and Delilah, it did not go well. Patrick threw a huge tantrum. He showed up at our house unannounced one evening, completely livid. He started screaming at his dad, saying Richard was ruining their family and betraying his mom's memory by marrying me. He called me horrible names, gold digger, homewrecker, you name it. He accused me of manipulating Richard and trying to replace his mom. It was awful. Richard tried to calm him down but Patrick just got more worked up. I'll never forget the look of pure hatred on Patrick's face as he spat insults at me. It was clear in that moment that there was no salvaging our relationship. Richard finally had enough and told Patrick to leave. As Patrick stormed out, he yelled that if Richard married me, he'd be dead to him. After that incident, Richard decided to go low contact with Patrick. It broke his heart, but he knew he couldn't allow his son to treat me that way. He still kept in touch with Delilah occasionally, mostly to check on Patrick, but I avoided seeing her altogether. Needless to say, neither of them were invited to our small wedding ceremony last year. We tried to move on and focus on our new life together. Richard and I bought a lovely little 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. We talked about maybe fostering some rescue dogs since we both love animals but weren't sure about having kids at our age. Things were good for a while. Then, a few months after we got married, we heard through the grapevine that Patrick had gotten married in secret to his college girlfriend, Megan. They hadn't told anyone in the family, not even Delilah. Richard was really hurt that he wasn't included in his only son's wedding. He tried reaching out to congratulate Patrick, but never got a response. From what we heard from mutual acquaintances, Patrick and Megan had a lavish wedding at an expensive venue. Apparently Delilah had helped pay for a lot of it, even taking out a second mortgage on her house. It stung Richard to know that his mother had been involved while he was completely shut out. Things were quiet for almost a year until last month when Delilah called me out of the blue. I was surprised to hear from her and almost didn't answer. But something told me it might be important, so I picked up. Delilah sounded distraught. She said Patrick and Megan were getting divorced after only 10 months of marriage. Apparently Patrick had been caught emotionally cheating with a coworker. He'd been exchanging inappropriate texts and emails with this woman for months. Megan found out and was devastated. She kicked Patrick out of their house, which was in her name, and filed for divorce. To make matters worse, Patrick had been fired from his job over the inappropriate relationship with his co-worker. He was struggling financially and had nowhere to go. Delilah had taken him in temporarily but said she couldn't afford to support him long-term on her fixed income. Delilah asked if Patrick could stay with us for a while until he got back on his feet. She pleaded with me to talk to Richard about it, saying Patrick was family and we needed to help him. I was hesitant given our strained relationship, but I agreed to discuss it with Richard. Richard was conflicted when I told him about Delilah's call. On one hand, he still loved his son and hated to think of him struggling. But he also hadn't forgotten how horribly Patrick had treated me. We talked it over for hours and finally agreed to at least meet with Patrick to discuss the situation. In hindsight, that was a big mistake. We invited Patrick over to talk. When he showed up, he looked terrible, unshaven, bags under his eyes, clothes rumpled. But any sympathy I felt evaporated as soon as he opened his mouth. Instead of apologizing for his past behavior or showing any gratitude, Patrick immediately started making demands. He said he'd only agree to move in if we signed legal papers giving him 50% ownership of our house. He claimed he needed protection so we couldn't kick him out on a whim. I was stunned by his audacity. This was the home Richard and I had bought together with our own hard-earned money. Patrick hadn't contributed a cent. I flat out refused and told Patrick there was no way we were giving him partial ownership. He got angry and said he didn't trust me, which is why he needed it in writing. He accused me of trying to cut him out of his inheritance. Never mind that Richard and I are still relatively young and hopefully have many years ahead of us. That was the last straw for me. I told Patrick that if he didn't trust me enough to live here, he could find somewhere else to stay. I wasn't going to be manipulated or guilted into giving him half our property. Richard backed me up, much to Patrick's surprise. He seemed to think his dad would take his side. We asked Patrick to leave. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Richard and I were shaken. We couldn't believe how entitled and manipulative Patrick had become. It was clear he hadn't changed at all in the years we've been apart. Now Delilah and Patrick are furious. They've been badmouthing us to the whole family, saying we're heartless for not helping Patrick in his time of need. Richard's siblings and cousins have been texting us nonstop telling us we're terrible parents and owe Patrick an apology. They're saying we should be ashamed for turning our backs on family. I don't think we did anything wrong. Patrick is an adult who made his own bad choices. We were willing to help until he tried to take advantage of us. But the family pressure is intense and Richard is starting to feel guilty. He wonders if we should have tried harder to work something out with Patrick. I'm standing firm in my decision. I don't think we owe Patrick anything, especially not half our house. But I hate seeing Richard torn up about this. Ida for refusing to let Patrick move in under those ridiculous terms? Should we have tried to compromise somehow? I just don't know what to do at this point. Update 1. Thank you all for the supportive comments on my original post. Reading through them really helped validate that Richard and I weren't in the wrong here. It gave us the strength to stand our ground in the face of intense family pressure. After discussing it further, Richard and I decided to block Patrick, Delilah, and all the family members who were harassing us about the situation. It wasn't an easy decision. Richard especially struggled with cutting off contact with his mom and siblings. But we realized we needed to protect our mental health and our marriage from all the negativity. The first few days after blocking everyone were tough. Richard was quiet and withdrawn. I could tell he was wrestling with a lot of guilt and doubt. We had some long, emotional conversations about it all. Richard admitted that Patrick had always been spoiled and entitled, but it had reached a level where even he couldn't excuse it anymore. He talked about how hard it had been raising Patrick as a single dad. He tried his best, but looking back, he realized he'd probably been too lenient at times. It was easier to give in to Patrick's demands than to constantly battle with Delilah over parenting decisions. Richard felt like he'd failed as a father by allowing Patrick to become so manipulative and selfish. I reassured Richard that he'd done the best he could in a difficult situation. I reminded him of all the good qualities Patrick had. He was smart, ambitious, and could be very charming when he wanted to be. Those traits came from Richard's influence. The negative behaviors were largely a result of Delilah's spoiling and undermining Richard's authority. Gradually, Richard started to accept that giving in to Patrick's demands now would only enable his bad behavior further. He realized that by setting firm boundaries, he was actually doing Patrick a favor in the long run. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary if Patrick was ever going to grow up and take responsibility for his actions. We hoped that going no contact would give Patrick the wake-up call he needed to reflect on his actions and try to become a better person. Maybe without us as a scapegoat, he'd be forced to look at his own choices. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. About a month after blocking everyone, Patrick showed up at our house unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon and I was out meeting with a client. Richard was home alone, grading papers in his home office. He heard a loud knocking at the door and was shocked to find Patrick standing there when he answered. Patrick looked terrible. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were shabby. He begged Richard to let him in to talk. Against his better judgment, Richard agreed. He felt sorry for his son and hoped maybe Patrick had come to apologize. I got home about an hour later to find Richard sitting on the couch looking upset. Patrick was gone, but it was clear their conversation had not gone well. Richard filled me in on what had happened. At first, Patrick had acted contrite. He cried and said he was sorry for how he'd behaved. He talked about how hard things had been since the divorce. He'd been staying on friends' couches, unable to find a new job because of the scandal at his old company. He said he missed his dad and wanted to make amends. Richard started to soften, feeling sympathy for his son's plight. But then Patrick's true motives came out. He started talking about how I had stolen Richard away from him and Delilah. He claimed I was poisoning their relationship and turning Richard against his real family. He told Richard he needed to man up and stand up to me. When Richard defended me in our marriage, Patrick got nasty. He called Richard a coward and said he was ashamed to be his son. He even brought up Richard's late wife, Patrick's mom, and said she would be disappointed in Richard for choosing me over his real family. That was a low blow that really hurt Richard. It was the breaking point for Richard. He finally snapped and told Patrick exactly what he thought of his entitled, manipulative behavior over the years. He said Patrick was a selfish brat and his mother would be ashamed of the person he had become. He blamed Delilah for spoiling Patrick rotten and told him to get out of our house and our lives for good. Patrick stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. Richard was shaken and emotional when I got home. He felt awful for losing his temper, but I assured him Patrick had pushed him to the breaking point. I was proud of Richard for standing up for himself and our marriage. We've since learned that Patrick went straight to Delilah's house and twisted the story to make himself the victim. He told her Richard had viciously attacked him out of nowhere when he came to apologize. Now Delilah is on a rampage, leaving nasty voicemails and turning even more family members against us. But Richard and I are done playing these games. We're sticking to our no-contact decision and focusing on our marriage. We've started seeing a couples therapist to work through some of the emotional fallout from all this family drama. It's helping us communicate better and stay united. It's sad that it came to this, but we can't keep toxic people in our lives, even if they're family. Richard still has moments of guilt and grief over losing his relationship with his son. But overall, we know we're doing what's best for our mental health and our marriage. We're cautiously optimistic about the future and looking forward to building a drama-free life together. Update 2. It's been about 6 months since the big blow-up with Patrick, and a lot has changed in our lives. Richard and I are doing better than ever without the constant drama. We've been enjoying the peace and quiet and focusing on nurturing our relationship. We decided to take a step we've been considering for a while. We adopted a dog. We got a 5-year-old rescue mutt named Buddy from the local shelter. He's a mix of who knows what, with floppy ears and the sweetest brown eyes. The shelter told us he'd been abandoned by his previous owners when they moved and couldn't keep him. It broke our hearts to think of this gentle boy being left behind. Buddy was shy and anxious at first, but he's really come out of his shell in the past few months. He follows Richard around like a shadow and loves nothing more than cuddling on the couch while we watch TV. He's the sweetest, most loving dog and has brought so much joy into our lives. I know it might sound silly, but Buddy has really helped fill a void for Richard. He's still sad about the estrangement from Patrick, but having Buddy to care for has been healing. Richard loves taking him on long walks in the mornings before work. They become regulars at the local dog park on weekends. It's so heartwarming to see them bond. We've been posting lots of pictures of Buddy on social media. Richard especially loves sharing dad and dog selfies. Recently, a mutual friend told me they saw Patrick had made some bitter comments on Twitter about being replaced by a mutt and how some people care more about dogs than their own kids. We can't say for sure it was about us, but the timing fits. Honestly, we just felt sad for Patrick that he's still so angry and resentful months later. Richard said it was ridiculous for Patrick to be jealous of a dog. Buddy isn't replacing anyone, he's just adding more love to our family. If Patrick had made different choices, there would have been room for everyone in our lives. In other news, Delilah tried reaching out to Richard last month on his birthday. She left a voicemail guilting him about cutting off family and saying Patrick was struggling without his dad. She said Patrick had finally gotten a new job, but was having trouble making ends meet. She not so subtly hinted that we should help him out financially. Richard deleted the voicemail without responding. We both agreed it was just another manipulative tactic. If Patrick truly wanted to make amends, he knew how to reach us directly. We weren't going to get sucked back into the drama through Delilah. Work has been going well for both of us. I landed a big new client that's keeping me busy with exciting projects. Richard was chosen to develop a new history curriculum for his school district. We've been putting the extra money into home improvements. We repainted the living room and are planning to redo the kitchen next year. We've also been trying to expand our social circle since cutting ties with Richard's family left a bit of a void. We joined a couples bowling league and have been getting to know the other teams. It's been fun to have a standing weekly double date night. We're slowly building our own chosen family of friends. Part of me hoped Patrick would eventually come around and sincerely apologize. I know Richard would love to reconcile if Patrick could take accountability for his actions and commit to changing his entitled behavior. But at this point, it doesn't seem likely. We're at peace with our decision to maintain no contact, as hard as it can be sometimes. Update 3, just a quick final update as we approach the 1-year mark of going no contact with Patrick and Delilah. Life has been so much calmer and drama-free without them in it. Richard and I are thriving in our marriage and careers. Buddy is still the best boy ever and brings us so much happiness every day. We did have one incident a couple months ago where Patrick showed up at our house again unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon and Richard and I were out running errands. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, texted to let us know Patrick was banging on our door and yelling. She said he seemed agitated and possibly drunk. We immediately called the police to have him removed from the property. By the time we got home, Patrick was gone but had left a crumpled note in our mailbox. It was a rambling mess of accusations and guilt-tripping. He claimed we had ruined his life by cutting him off and demanded we make things right. After that scary incident, we decided to take steps to protect ourselves. We installed security cameras around the property and got a restraining order against Patrick. It was a tough decision for Richard, but he knew it was necessary for our safety and peace of mind. The day he signed the paperwork was emotional, but he said he felt relieved afterward. We haven't had any issues since then, thankfully. We did hear through the grapevine that Patrick lost his new job after showing up drunk one too many times. Apparently he's moved in with Delilah full-time now. I feel bad for her having to support him, but it's not our problem to solve. Richard still struggles sometimes with guilt and sadness over the estrangement. Father's Day was especially hard for him this year. But overall, he knows we made the right choice. We can't keep toxic people in our lives just because they're blood relatives. We're focusing on building our own chosen family now through close friends and our fur baby Buddy. We've gotten closer with our neighbors and coworkers. Richard has really bonded with another teacher at his school who also has a strained relationship with his adult child. It's been healing for him to talk with someone who understands. As for me, I've started volunteering at the animal shelter where we got Buddy. It feels good to give back and help other rescue pets find loving homes. Richard sometimes comes with me on weekends to walk the dogs. We're considering fostering in the future when we have more time. Work is going well for both of us. I recently won an industry award for a branding campaign I did for a nonprofit. Richard got a promotion to department head at his school. We're planning a trip to Europe next summer to celebrate our 3rd wedding anniversary, something we've always dreamed of doing together. Life isn't perfect, but it's pretty darn good. We still have moments of sadness about the family situation, but they're fewer and farther between. We're excited for the future and whatever it may bring. Thanks to everyone who supported us through this difficult journey. Here's to choosing peace and surrounding yourself with people who truly love and respect you.